Welcome to the Supply Chain Lab. Today we're going beyond the wheels to uncover what really makes fleet operations elite. It's not just about moving goods, it's about people, technology, strategy working together. Joining me today is Jonathan Mphake, a fleet safety and operations expert who knows what it takes to run an award-winning fleet operation. We'll talk about AI, driver safety, automation, and the big question, can fleets go green without going broke? Buckle up, this is going to be a good one. Let's get right into it. Hi, Jonathan. How are you doing?
Hi, well, and yourself?
I'm all right. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for making time. We know you're quite a busy guy, and getting you to join us is really great. So I think what we should start with is just an introduction about yourself. What is your story? How did you get into fleet management and leadership? Yeah.
Oh, no, fantastic. So with me, what happened is my father was a truck driver for more than 25 years. I remember him at times delivering me instead of the consignment that he was supposed to deliver at high school at Dinwiddie High, and all the kids thinking, why is this guy coming out of a fridge truck? What is going on with him? So my journey really started falling in love with the idea of understanding what goes on in the family of a truck driver. How does that family feel? And is the companies that are employing them professional enough to make them get home safe? So I started at Value Logistics as tracking. We had a very fancy name for it, tracking executor. But all it was is you followed the trucks on the screen, had different opportunities in different places. Unitrans was a supply chain manager for Takealot. I was a business unit manager for Imperial Cargo Solutions, and a lot of principals, Castrol, BP, different types. I also delivered newspapers for Allied Publishing, which was very interesting. And then I was at Easy Access, which is an equipment, work at height, safety solution provider. And then now I'm at SPV Services as the National Fleet Manager. I also wear a hat of a director at the supply chain professional body. It's more of a community called SAPEX. And also the vice president of the Association of Fleet Professionals. So for me, the love and the commencement of the journey was understanding. Just like my sister, me and my sister would wait at home, waiting for our father to come back home. And when I got into logistics, got into supply chain management, I said, I can make a difference to those families as well.
Okay, I mean, that's quite a beautiful story. It's nice that it's also quite a personal story, and it's also nice to kind of get the background of somebody whose parent was actually in fleet management in some way or form. You know, they contributed to that. So for myself, and I guess for the people also listening to the podcast, can you maybe explain to us what exactly fleet management is? Is it different to logistics management? Is it part of logistics? Just give us like a good description on what we're talking about when we say fleat management.
So one of the biggest things, and I hope is it okay to use my hands, I'm very expressive, sometimes trying to express. But basically fleet management, first and foremost, is a science.
Okay.
Under the ambit of supply chain management and the different elements that constitute supply chain management, like you rightfully said, some will refer to it as transport. You would hear qualifications for transport economics. You'd hear qualifications that are geared into logistics. And I think fleet management sits really in between all of that.
Okay.
In some companies, the logistics manager will be involved and responsible for fleet management. But I think as we look at the different sectors and the different responsibilities, especially after COVID, you realize that fleet management on its own is something that is very important to the sustainability of an organization. So in terms of worrying about every aspect of vehicle health, of how does that impact with the driver, how does it dovetail with the processes, how does it dovetail with the customer centricity that the business wants to see happen, fleet management is there. And a lot of other people would say fleet management is based on road only, but actually if you think about anything that constitutes a fleet, whether it's drones in the new environment, whether it's ships, material handling in the warehousing perspective, all of those have some ethos and fundamental that is fleet management that needs to be looked at as a science.
Okay.
So it's making sure that the health and the vehicles are in tip-top shape. That would be the basic application of it. But as you touch the supply chain world or logistics, then you look at it holistically, not just as I've loaded a consignment from point A to B, but everything in between needs to be the responsibility of a fleet manager.
Okay. I mean, I think that's a good description. Even I didn't know that, and I've been in supply chain for 100 years.
You don't look at it at all.
Yeah, I think that's a good description of what fleet management is. I also like something that you touched on where you said it's not just about the trucks, it's also like just the whole ecosystem where transportation is basically involved. Can you just unpack that a little bit more and just tell us what the value drivers are with regards to the role that fleet management plays within the supply chain?
So it's very, very interesting, and it's something that a lot of us sometimes would take for granted. So I'll give you practical examples if that is okay, to elaborate it.
Yeah.
When I was at Unitrans, there's one company I forgot to mention, but when I was at Unitrans, we had different types of fleet in the particular contract we were doing for Dulux and Castrol. And we needed 8-tonners for some consignments, we needed 6-tonners, we needed a panel van. So it was quite a huge fleet mix. And why that was to make sure that the different types of paint application we had, we could load on the correct truck. Now, the question then becomes, why is that a commercial discussion? So for us as Unitrans, we were the 3PL or third-party logistics. Our mandate for Castrol, South Africa, and for Dulux was to distribute this paint nationally, to do the warehousing and distribution, and actually make sure we deliver on time to their principal customers. And for that, to do that, we had to understand optimized routing and scheduling. That's where it touches supply chain and logistics. We had to understand matrix like OTIF, on time delivered in full, not just OTD. We had to understand all the little KPI matrix that constitutes the whole operation. So that when we say to Dulux we have 97.5% on time delivered in full, that translates into their customers being excited and actually for them to serve their customers. So it now talks to customer centricity, where now you understand a couple of elements. Total cost of ownership is a lot of fleet managers look at, but we also look at what's cost per kilometer or cents per kilometer. In other words, and this also talks into SMEs as well. I saw a lot of questions that sometimes come my way from SMEs. How do I quote my principal if I'm trying to get business? Well, for you to do that from a fleet management perspective, you must understand what cents per kilometer is. And cents per kilometer constitute your maintenance, your fuel expenditure. It's understanding those expenses, whether it's insurance, you're doing GIT, or you're doing all types of other insurance, whether your truck is going to be fit for that application. So that science allows you to be agile in the sense where, let's say the volume for Dulux is now, tapering off, or it's increasing. I understand what mix constitute my core fleet. I understand if I have to get ad hoc fleet or additional fleet, what type of fleet I need. I understand those requirements. If it's mining, if it's fridge, if it's different application, you must understand everything that covers that vehicle, commensurate to what you want to do in terms of customer centricity and profitability or return on investment for your fleet.
Okay, I mean, it sounds like quite a complex, there's actually quite a bit of complexity in it. So can you just touch on some of the challenges that you face as a fleet manager?
So from that perspective, I've been fortunate in my career and journey. I've been really fortunate. I've had people open a lot of doors for me. So, I've been fortunate that I'm involved. I am part of fleet management, but I also see the total supply chain management element of it. One of the challenges I see in fleets particularly is there is an advent of technology that's coming in, and the utilization of that technology in the fleet needs to be understood by the company or the business at large. Because we need to glean from that technology instruments that we put in the vehicles to help us manage the vehicles properly. But the adoption and the implementation of that technology sometimes causes a lot of frustration for commercial fleet owners and SMEs, large organizations, because we do not, fundamentally use that to manage the fleet properly. Everyone has tracking, and one of my favorite subjects is telematics and explaining to people. There is tracking where it's a dot on the screen, you have a tracking unit, it's inside the vehicle. I'm happy for you, this is tremendous. Now you've qualified to be on the mine and actually do what they said. Yes, but what does telematics tell you? It tells you about driver behavior and it tells you about vehicle performance as well. So that becomes the two fundamental pillars in fleet management. The biggest problem, as I said, is adopting, understanding, using this technology. And the other facet of it is the people part. We don't, in businesses, sometimes do the proper change management that is required. And that leads us into a lot of trouble downstream, because if we do not implement things and the people are not there with us and we think they're just robots and we think they're just tools that will execute what we want as senior management, the best thing is to adopt and tell the people the why you want to implement technology. Because a lot of companies now, C-Track, Mix Telematics, PowerTrack, everyone can sell you a tracking system, but you have to understand it's telemetry. And if you go to a deeper level where you're talking about route optimization, then you have to understand, am I doing a supply chain control tower? Am I following the precepts of TMS or transport management system? Am I also understanding the governance element of it? Most organizations that are in large trucking need to be RTMS approved. And that's the 1395 SAN standard. Basically, if you think about it, the way I explain it to a lot of people internally and other companies, it's ISO for fleet management. So understanding what are the pillars of RTMS? How does RTMS help you? Because one of the biggest things we face as fleet managers is crash rate. We are responsible to make sure our vehicles run smoothly, not just from a commercial perspective, to make sure the driver comes back home, but the other road users. We have, I think, the second highest, or the highest, I looked at the latest stats of vehicle crashes in the world. We have such irresponsible driver behavior. But instead of saying, woe is me as a fleet manager, I'm going to use the technology that's in the vehicles to train my drivers, to make them better, and ultimately make sure that they are safe and contribute to the reduction of crashes in the country.
Okay. I mean, I think there's one thing that I would like to just go back on, RTMS. I think you need to unpack it a little bit. What is it? Just explain it to somebody that doesn't know what it is, because I personally don't know what it is. I've never worked in fleet or logistics. So I think, just take us through what RTMS is. You said a lot of people need to have a certification.
Yes.
Yeah, so just explain that.
So for most, let me start where RTMS started. RTMS started as an answer to how do we self-regulate as the industry, improve the safety standards so that, we have a more professional fleet, professional trucking services that impact and actually makes us good corporate citizens. And I think it started in the forestry industry with those trucks. And there's a couple of elements. There's an element called PBS where you can load or configure your trailer to be in a different consignment, larger, higher, wider, depending on the dimensions that will allow that vehicle to be on the road. So that's a special permit. But RTMS has these pillars that says, as the transport sector, we are going to self-regulate. That's the foundational purpose of it. What are the best practices in fleet that you need to look at, that if you apply this to fleet management, it will allow you not only to be safe yet profitable, but it will allow us to lift the standards and actually do what is right. Then came it being South African Bureau of Standards actual standard, and that's the SANS 1395 that I quoted. It talks to internationally, there's an equivalent called, not really an equivalent, but it's RTQS, which goes back into the ISO standard type of mindset of creating this best practice benchmarks that will allow your fleet to be proper. Some of the pillars, and just off the top of my head, Oliver Naidu will kill me if I forget the pillars, because him and and quite a lot of people did a lot of good work. Nikki Scott Anderson in terms of RTMS and implementation, and Dr. Paul Nodigan. So Dr. Paul and Oliver really did a lot of groundwork to implement RTMS, and a lot of truckers. I'll give you a test. So when you're on the road, you must look at trucks. If you see a yellow diamond, that's RTMS.
Okay.
In front of the vehicle. So that
In
means
the front.
In the front of the vehicle. So that means they've been certified, they've gone through the process, it's a proper audit. You do like ISO stage 1, stage 2 certification, re-audits, you do all of that.
Okay.
And the 4 major pillars of RTMS, if I hopefully I won't forget any of them, but first of all, it talks about load management. So much of the accidents that we see on the road, it's one, the vehicle is not the right fit for what it's loading. Secondly, the servicing and maintenance, which we'll get to, is part of the pillar, but in terms of loading, people overload or they don't do loading dependent on what they're trying to do, meaning they don't use the space in layman's terms. And loaded, you hear drivers going into the weighbridge and say, I have an axle overload. You loaded some of the consignment, larger consignment on the axle where it should have been spread out of the vehicle. So truckers normally get those traffic fines when the trucks get pulled on the weighbridge. So it says in RTMS standard, you need to have a fleet that is commensurate to what you're loading.
Okay.
So that's part of the load control. Are you doing configuration? Do you know, Dulux, for example, if I loaded that or any other place where I loaded consignment stock with pallets, I know how many pallets go into a 30-ton. I know what's the weight. I know what is the weight density of that consignment that I'm loading, and I know how to load it throughout the actual truck. So that's one element of it. Another element and it's part of the 4th element, but what element I want to really talk about is understanding the wellness of the driver. And I'll combine a couple of elements that are spread out of the standard. And that speaks to a lot of the truckers are under National Bargaining Council of Road Freight ambit. And we know vehicles need to stop at 10 o'clock, the drivers need to clock off, so on and so forth. How does an organization manage the driving and on-duty hours of the drivers? Is it scientific? Is it documented? Why is this important? Are you trying to alleviate overtime? No. It's fatigue management. So many of the crashes are crashes because drivers are tired. I was listening to one of the stories on the radio, and the guy spoke about there was a truck driver that left Durban and went to Malawi and drove back again, but the hours in which and the days he spent were so short because of the pressure of operations. Now imagine that gentleman or lady behind the wheel of a 30-ton truck coming downhill, being very sleepy. How do you mitigate that? And it talks about that, the driver wellness from a health perspective. Do we do medical surveillance like it's required in ISO? Do you test? Do you support? Do you help your drivers in terms of that particular element? And the standard gives you that. The other part is servicing of vehicles. So you'll see a golden thread throughout this, and it's called the gold standard for fleet management. And it's a safety element right through. Are you maintaining and servicing your vehicles commensurate to what they're supposed to be? If it is no, then it has a crash element as well. Because if you have a big truck, a small truck, whether it's air brakes or normal brakes, even if we do the EV transition, there's still elements of servicing and preventative and regular maintenance. Can you show that you are doing that? Because then you're putting the driver in a position, you're giving them this load that costs might be millions, you're giving them this truck, you're putting their lives and the other road users' lives in danger. If you don't service the truck, it won't apply. And from a commercial perspective, if you don't service the truck, it most necessarily will break down, and the lead time to get the truck back into the fleet will be longer because you are not adhering to that. So how are you doing your maintenance? How are you looking at ESG in terms of fuel consumption? If you don't service your truck, the emissions will definitely go up. But apart from just focusing on the emission, your liter per 100 will go up. Your fuel consumption will go up. It will cost you more, And when you ultimately come to the place where maybe you are forced to fix the vehicle, the cost will be now extreme, where you could have amortized it over a period, and you're making sure your fleet and everyone does right. So the RTMS auditors will check all of that. They'll check the principles. How are you doing this? And you only get the certification when you do your internal, exactly like ISO, your internal audit, you do your stage 1, you do your stage 2, and then you are independently and objectively audited. This was also supported, and it's still supported by government, because it's self-regulation. Government doesn't have the time to go check all of our trucks and do vehicle inspection on all of our trucks. It's just not going to work. So as an industry, we are self-regulating ourselves and say, this is what we want to see happen, and know we've achieved best practice.
Okay. I mean, I think you've given us quite good insights. I've learned a lot from that. So I know one of the things that you kept kind of bringing in is just driver behavior and some of the safety elements of it. Can you just take us through what are some of the critical issues when it comes to driver behavior and safety? And what role does leadership, like somebody that's in leadership like yourself, what role do you have in ensuring that the drivers are safe? Not just from a like driving on the road perspective, but also the health implications of sitting in a truck for long hours.
So thank you very much. That's actually a critical big question. It goes back to how do you monitor your fleet? So if we look at telematics, there's harsh braking, speeding, cornering, excessive idling, which has an ESG component of it. How do you look at that? With other technologies that are coming into fleet management, there's also dash cameras. Cameras that look within the vehicle, cameras that look outside the vehicle. And in this data set, there is huge amounts of data. Where we sometimes fail as fleet managers is that we don't convert that data into insights. We get bamboozled by the volume of the data. So it goes back to what I said earlier in terms of your service provider that you choose. You need to have a relationship where the data is explored and it's shown to you for you to get insight. Why is that important for driver behavior? From there, I can create a DNA of the driver. I understand from the events that are generated through these systems, what is the gaps that each and every individual driver has in their driving pattern, and what interventions. And one of the pillars I actually forgot to mention is training. So the standard says you must have structured driver training. So you take that, you make sure that that's understood by your supporting structure, whether you have a fleet controller, whether you have a fleet supervisor on the ground. And the vision, which is fundamental, needs to be clear. I've seen where the vision is not clear, where the drivers think, why are you putting a camera in my truck? Do you want to monitor me? You're invading my privacy. What is this? And it goes back to change management. But if they understand the why and you bring this up to them, your insurance claims, your crashes, everything gets sorted out. But fundamentally, you have to, as then the leader, and this is a phrase I've quoted that we just created in engaging with the drivers. You have to speak to the drivers and not at the drivers. And it's a fundamentally big difference. The drivers need to understand in a language in which they can consume, where you engage with them. Now, gentlemen, ladies, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing this. This is how we're doing this. And then when we see gaps in your driving, going back to the driver DNA, we will train you accordingly because we want to coach you, not discipline you. Yes, in leadership, you'll find people you have to discipline. They contravene the acts and they contravene everything. But the vast majority of people is that they want to do good and they want to keep their jobs. And now, as a leader who understands fleet management, you translate all that data set. And it's a concept that comes from supply chain management, actually. In establishing supply chain control towers, you'll hear a lot of people talk about people process technology or that methodology. Who are the people? The drivers, the supervisors, the managers, the commercial guys, everyone. Collaboration is important that the whole organization understand where we're going. What is the process? You put in RTMS, you put in your SOPs, you put in your procedures and everything, and you don't just put them in, they don't just remain on the board, but they are living inside of the human beings that work in that organization. You cannot put these are our goals, our belief system on a wall and not explain and engage and get buy-in from the people. So you have people, process, you have the technology, and you synchronize all of this. And you as the leader, the fundamental thing about leadership is that you must be a leader that makes sure you create other leaders. You give that to the business, you give that to the drivers in a way they can consume it, and they will buy into your vision, and they will feel like it's our vision instead of his vision. The mistake we do sometimes as leaders is we're so much in our ivory towers that we never touch the peasants who are actually generating the work for us. And if we skip that and we say, I am going to be involved in every stream and sector and level of people who are doing this, they can really do it. Going back to my father, he used to work for Transvaal Atlas. Now, that doesn't exist anymore. It's like as old as the old number plates before we changed them to GT. Because they were all T or Transvaal. And in Transvaal Atlas, they had and this is another element that helps in driver behavior, that data DNA, you can actually reward the guys who are doing good. Every human being wants reward. Every human being wants recognition. Every human being wants to know, am I doing a good job? Is what I'm doing making an impact? And if we celebrate those drivers that are doing well, from a commercial and a compliance perspective, they now cause competition to the rest. And everyone is now geared to that. But my father, the drivers at Transvaal Atlas would meet at a place called My. It's a place where they sell lightning. No, I'm joking. But it's a place where it's a melting pot of so many cultures. I grew up as a young boy being in My. They sell bab.
Is this the one in town?
In town, right in the middle of Joburg Central. And sometimes it looked dodgy, but we felt really safe. But why I mention it is my dad and the drivers would have their own driver meeting. And they would say, okay, and these are men, and that's why it's so important never to undermine anyone. Everyone has value. These are men who, most of them didn't have grade 12 or what we call matric. But they understood the percentages and the performance, and they would actually call each other out. Listen, your route, you're not delivering. That route should be 18 stops. Dude, you did 4. And you are now playing with our bonus. We have a team bonus. But apart from that, they would call each other out on cleanliness of trucks. They will call each other out on attitude. And I grew up watching these men have those crucial conversations that were sometimes uncomfortable. But it was criticism that was designed to grow the person. Now, if they could do that by themselves, it's incumbent as fleet leaders to do that with our people so that they understand where we're going.
Okay. I also like what you touched on with regards to telematics and the role that telematics plays within the trucking industry. What else, with regards to fleet management from a technology perspective, like AI? I mean, I think you touched on a few of the technologies and how companies need to understand what the role of that technology within the business. I mean, I think in the perfect world, the technology would do everything, like telematics, driver, what, to do all of that. But what is the critical technology that you think is important within fleet management? And if you could build the perfect system, what would that look like?
So there's a lot of things that are available right now. Maybe if we touch on the buzzword everyone is touching on is AI. And in terms of fleet management, one of the things that we're seeing in North America, everywhere, even in South Africa, starting to adopt. You look at the mining, you look at oil, petrochemical, oil and gas, the different sectors. One of the things is really the thing that's going to transform every sector in the whole world is data management. Data is a key, and if we are going to be left behind, there's AI, there's machine learning, there's all of these things that are happening. One of the biggest one is the dash camera. And there's a company, obviously we're not here to promote, but the one that, the one I use, they have a methodology called Motor Vehicle Artificial Intelligence, so it's MVAI. So, and a lot of companies use that. But what MVAI does is that the camera on the inside would see different behaviors that drivers do. And the background and the foundation of that is, of course, machine learning and understanding and aggregating the data and analyzing the data. So what would happen on a typical day is the driver is driving and the AI sees him because it's built into the dash camera. He's not wearing a seatbelt. My drivers always make the joke, they're like, there's a lady talking to us inside our truck. We don't know who this lady is. She keeps saying, please check your seatbelt. You are distracted. And it looks at several things. Are you smoking? Are you food and drink? Lane departure, late deviation, distraction, fatigue management. And it creates that deeper understanding of the individual. And across the board, because there's this particular company that I use, they do 10 billion data points a day in analysis. So every event that's contrary to proper driving behavior gets sent to their analysis division in America. The AI has already said this is a problem, and it corrects them in real time while they're driving. So those, you get a warning, it's not an event as yet. If you persist, it becomes an event. The event gets sent to your supervisor and analyzed, and the analysis when it comes to the supervisor is, this is the event, date, time, stamp, location, everything. But then this is what you contravene, this is what we could analyze, and this is the recommendation. Then the supervisor sits with the driver and say, here's the gap, let's play the clip. Let's show you where you deviated. Let's show you where you went wrong. Let's agree. And this is the implementation, again, the question you asked me. If people have an idea of a stick approach, they will beat up the driver. But if they have an understanding of, even in the system, they are called coaches. You bring in the driver and you coach the driver. You explain to the driver, this is the deviation. Let's watch the video together. Because now you're objective now as the driver. Now you are able to say as the driver, I see you. That could have been a very big accident. Conversely, we also reward people who do right. Maybe they avoided the accident, they did well, and it gets recorded as well. And the coach can print a certificate from the system and say, well done, you did X, Y, Z, to also encourage that. But that's one of the bigger ones that we're seeing. There's always technology, and you must understand your application. There's technology in terms of the instruments of using those cameras, the tracking, and monitoring every aspect. We do a lot of sensors in the vehicles where I work. Sensor G-force. If there's impact too much on the vehicle, it reports their control rooms. And you can take it a step further. So there are companies that do what's called fleet management information systems. So in fleet management, you have a lot of huge data sets. You have your fuel data, maybe that's coming from your fuel provider. You have all the data I mentioned, the driver behavior, the driver hours, the deviations. You have telematics data in terms of not just dot on the screen, but we delivered. There's a scoring, there's a commercial element. You have the drive cam or the dash camera data, ESG component, maintenance expenditure, tire expenditure, insurance premiums, all of these things. And you aggregate that into a fleet information system that kind of collates and brings everything together. From there, you are able to discern what is happening in your fleet, but from end to end. And you must also know when to defleet the vehicles where they're going to cost you more money in maintenance and get rid of it while it's economically viable and bring in a replacement, and also replace those vehicles in the right path according to your governance structures. So that technology is kicking up. You'll see in the market a lot of aggregators. Again, I know most of them. There's some of them I meet at conference. The one will be upset with me if I don't mention him. So, you mention my competition and not me. It will be. And the guy who's going to watch this, his company's green. He knows himself. He's always chasing me. Please mention me. I'm like, no, I'm not advertising. You must pay for your own adverts. But you'll see a lot of fleet data aggregators in the market. If we jump and go further, let's say now you're the supply chain director and you want to make sure your deliveries, those measurements I mentioned, on time, delivered in full, and this applies to a supply chain control tower. Now that's raw material coming by sea, freight, air, every type of transport, but you want to track the process in between. And we did that when I was at Takealot. We knew our suppliers, what they're bringing. We knew from the predictor analytics what stock we want, how bulk is it, shelf life and lead times in warehousing, when it's going to get to distribution, when it's going to get to the end customer. And the goal of companies like Takealot, Amazon, and all of those, the thing that makes them good is the understanding of that data. So logistics becomes part of the node or the pillar inside the control tower. Because now you know when the lead time here, the lead time here, the lead time here. And what customers are doing right now, and it's a big thing that's going to be, as more people get into different spheres, you see Checker 6060 and how that has changed last mile delivery. The data is important, yes, but the execution commensurate to the expectation of your customer becomes important. And all of that from the back end to the front end that you and I see is aggregated by that. So if you put in a control tower, you know what the data says, you know from the fleet management system that gets pulled in, you know if there's bottlenecks in your supply chain. Where do I look? How do I fix? How do I have a lean management mentality to do an intervention there to make my whole supply chain more efficient?
Okay. And how do you then balance automation and driver behavior? Because I think a lot of the time we believe that AI or automating a lot of processes is what's better, but sometimes there are some ethical issues when it comes to technology. There's that. And then sometimes as a human, you just know which decision is better in that particular instance. So how do you then train drivers to know when to take over and when to actually listen to technology?
So, like in the environment that I'm in right now, there's places where if we are under attack, you have to sort of drive, still defensive driving, but in a heightened sense because you need to get away. So obviously you would not entirely listen to the lady about changing lanes too quickly because you are under attack. You need to get away from wherever you are. But I think from an ethical perspective and the ethics of it is using that data as well, especially if we look at the POPI Act, and using that data for what it's intended and not for something else. It's important that as organizations, there's personal information that's there. It should not and must never get out in the public how these drivers are doing. And from an AI perspective, that's why you have continuous improvement and learning. Part of that 10 billion data points that go through that particular analysis company, you will find maybe the AI says, driver drove wrong, this is not right. But when you as the human look at the video, you understand that this is an incorrect judgment from the AI.
Okay.
And you are able to override it so that from a people perspective, the driver doesn't think you're out to get them. You sit down with the driver and you say, or as the supervisor, there's an event, it's come through, the AI says this, I'm looking at this and I'm overruling this. This is not right. So to give that space to the human element, because machines will get better over time. I saw Elon Musk say in 10, 15 years, machines will do 80% better what humans do. That's wonderful and tremendous. But technology and AI is supposed to augment what we do, not really completely take over. A lot of mundane tasks can be automated. Like I said, these technology, what happens in a lot of fleets, what took so many people to capture on Excel and do the fuel consumption. What if you have a 2,000, 10,000 trucks? To do all of these things takes long. But now, with this AI and modeling, it can go into data, analyze it, tell me, but I still have the right to say, I see this particular principle that you override, and it's also I'm going to make it learn so that it doesn't do that or analyze it like that. That particular example I gave, the driver would come in, you would make a note, it goes back into that facility, and that's where machine learning really comes into it because but it's incumbent for us to be a good corporate citizen. We cannot then be lazy and not be thinking of people and be unethical because of just AI. It's not an automatic thing. it's a thing that's supposed to help us.
Okay. And I think I like what you brought up with regards to technology. So do you think technology is going to replace drivers? Because now obviously we see the disruption in the trucking industry with automation, like trucks that don't need drivers, is this what the industry is going to look like in the future? If I was a truck driver, how would I ensure that I am gathering the right skills so that my job is not on the line?
On the line, yeah. I think it also takes back from an economic perspective. There's the things when we always think about the macro and the microeconomic environment of different countries. We think about even the cost of that technology, the maintenance of it, going back to the CPK. Yesterday I was presenting at a conference that looked at EV transition. And one of the things I said to the guys is that the timeline might seem short, but obviously based on what we are doing and the application of logistics that we're doing, we need to be careful in just going gunshot approach and doing everything electrification. Based on our economic realities, based on our country realities, this is what is going to happen. And yes, we're in a global competition. Yes, we want to make sure that we stay at the cutting edge. But I think for the drivers, they must understand that, technology is there to help them. I said in the example, and this is my own personal view, it's not a research thing, that I strongly believe the transition will even happen almost in the same manner that it did in the aviation space, where you still have, in essence, the machines are driving or flying the planes, but you have that human element that can override it. I saw a very interesting documentary recently where they're piloting automation of trucks. And they put in a lady who had driven trucks, I think 35 years, and they've been testing for 2 years now, all the things that can happen and go wrong, and they find so many things that the machinery and the automated driver, and it goes back to the ethical, because this is a big question everywhere. How far are we going to allow AI to be in control, and what decisions and what values built into the AI is going to rule and overrule? But I think for drivers, there will still be a need for it, and there will still be a need for drivers in some sort of way. But I think it's going to end up being in that manner. For South Africa, there's challenges in energy. There's challenges in terms of technology from a networking perspective and all of those. So it'll slow down the implementation, but the implementation is still there. It's still going to happen. And with the United Nations sustainability goals, that is also going to push a lot of things and government to apply and do what is necessary. But for drivers, the drivers just have to make sure they adjust as the curve moves and know what they need to do. In that same documentary, they spoke about these gentlemen and ladies who were working at the port. And what has happened, they've created a no human zone where it's all machinery that moves the different parts of what's happening in the port. They've transitioned the drivers of those material handling trucks into almost like a control room where they still have that human element to overrule. Yes, the machinery does 90%. They observe, they take accountability of it, but then they can still rule and overrule the machinery to make sure. And with their experience and IP, they're able to do that in a much proficient way, where now technology is actually helping human beings do things better.
Okay, I actually like that example that you gave. I think in the podcast we had previously, the gentleman just mentioned that it's not AI that's going to take people's jobs, but it's the people that are able to use AI to do their work better. So I like that you brought that example up so that people also know that their jobs aren't at risk if they, like you said, keep up with the changes within the industry. I also like that you touched on sustainability. What does sustainability look like within fleet management? Is the future of sustainability when it comes to fleet management EV, like you mentioned? But obviously in South Africa, we have our energy issues. What, like, in your opinion, what does this look like in fleet management?
So I think fundamentally one of the things that, and you'll see a lot of organizations being under pressure, the carbon tax issue is coming up very quickly as well. So there's a legislation push to do that. But before you even get there in carbon credits and all of those things, you have to understand, and it goes back to everything that we said, the management of the vehicle. Are you servicing it properly? Are you doing everything? But do you monitor and manage liter per 100? Do you understand the levers that push it up? Is it driver behavior? Is it vehicle? If the guy speeds, obviously your consumption goes up. Commensurate, your carbon emissions will go up. You know, and what are those interventions we're really putting in place? So the future is we're going to transition. Yes, we are. It's going to be a staggered transition. And even if we sort out all of those issues for energy, there's going to be a transition based on what we are delivering and what we're doing. There's also a big element of infrastructure development. So we need the private sector as well as government to actually make, especially government in terms of making clarity some of the direction that they're going. But we need serious infrastructure input to make sure that that transition is also helped. Because as a country, we have so many deals and so many objectives that we want to do. But from a fleet perspective is how do you structure that route and schedule your vehicles, let's say they're electric, commensurate to the infrastructure to make sure that you still perform commercially and you still perform from a sustainability perspective. So it will be that the examples we see in the market of the different retailers and people who are starting the EV journey, our company is starting an EV journey, but from a different segment. There's one big segment, I cannot do that. But that segment, we're looking at how do we use hybrid vehicles? Because there's still a way. The big issue is how do we reduce our carbon emissions by having better vehicle, better Euro spec, the driver behavior is in check, the vehicle maintenance is in check. So you've covered all of that element, and you still can do your commercial side. But I think the transition will be a blended transition in the beginning. We're seeing that happen a lot. There's a lot of, gas. Gas fueling type of projects,
like biodiesel,
all of those green energy that's coming up, and there's a whole sector, parts, maintenance, all of that then comes through, but the fundamental basics. If you're a fleet manager 101, you've got a lot of ICE vehicles, but you still want to be responsible. Measure your fuel consumption. Understand the logic of how carbon emission is actually calculated. And from that perspective, you are able then to do what you need to do. Because a lot of, I talk to sometimes a lot of SMEs, and they have contracts and different things. And I say multinational organizations want to know carbon emission completely, because some of and most of their rulings is we take responsibility even for our suppliers' carbon emission. So the reporting becomes important. The understanding becomes important. And that's what we're going to see a lot in the fleet space.
Okay. And what is an underrated way that companies can already start to reduce their emissions without like changing their fleets to EV, for example, or buying biodiesel trucks or whatever? What is an underrated way that companies, I think you've mentioned fuel and how drivers are burning fuel. Is that the main one, or do you have others that you could share?
So that's the main one, driver behavior through telematics and managing it, talking to the people and actually monitoring what you're doing. One of the things about fuel management is you need to know what your base is. Different fleets and different vehicles will have possibly a lot of instances, different fuel consumption to what the equipment manufacturer or the OEM says. So maybe the OEM says this truck will be 23 liters per 100 kilometers, but you know that you've built in maybe a heavier truck, maybe there's different metals, there's different consignments that you load, there's different types of things that you do. You need to be able to know what is your real norm, so you monitor immediately any deviation. One of the things that's underrated about fuel consumption is tires. Sounds really weird. But your tire inflation, if it's right, and your tires are the correct size, the right size, if you drive with the wrong size, your inflation is wrong, everything is happening. What it's making the truck do is work, in layman's term, work harder than it should, and your consumption will go up. So as the people element, if some of my drivers know their own liter per 100, sharing that information, and he can do a quick calculation. What is my kilometer span? I filled in X liters. Hey, I'm still good. It's one of the KPIs for my scorecard. And everyone understanding that, understand what is the norm for your application. Not what the OEM necessarily says, but for your application. And from there, monitor and regulate any deviations. And like I said, a quick one that's underrated a lot is tire management. A lot of guys think, I'm going to cut corners, I'm going to get a cheapy tire. It doesn't go well for you in terms of fuel management. It does make sure you spend more than you should.
Okay, I think that's good advice. If I ever get into fleet management, I've made note of it. So another thing is, because obviously I've stalked you on LinkedIn, and I realized that you recently got recognized for fleet safety and excellence. What does it take to build an award-winning fleet operation?
Lots of luck, but but what it is I think fundamentally the passion and the care for what one does. Like I said, for me, I'm so privileged that I play in the whole space. So I play in total supply chain management. Even now at work, at the current work, there's a supply chain project while I'm doing fleet management. So it's understanding that end to end and understanding how do I contribute value within the organization as well. And again, commercial perspective and the focus on road safety. As you know, the vice president of this newly established Association of Fleet Professionals, what we're trying to do is make people understand fleet is a viable career, fleet is a science, fleet is something that we saw as the people involved, Eugene Herbert and Nishani and everyone involved in the establishment of this Association of Fleet Professionals. We saw that there's a need for us to get people into fleet management, understand the science behind fleet management, and actually do that best practice because there's a human element. When I waited, and my father had a steady job at this Transvaal Atlas, and then he had to go into a situation where there's labor brokering, where the labor broker takes you, puts you at another place, and then after that you are now sitting there and thinking to yourself, where am I going today? You know, I'm going to a bakery, I'm going to, because the drivers will be taken, sent to different branches by the labor broker. And when I think back on that and how my sister and I and my mom would think, I wish they are ethical where he's going. I wish they adhere to safety protocols where he's going. Now I look at it, and sometimes when I speak, most of the time when I speak to my drivers in the driver engagements, and again, speak to, not at, and I say to them, I represent your son and daughter who's at home waiting for you to come back safely. So the things I do, the things I implement is for your need, but I'm talking more to your family because I want you to get home safely.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that makes a big difference. I know in the oil and gas industry, they tend to make these very emotional videos, which they, I guess they create them for the driver to just show them the importance, their family's waiting for them at home, the impact of them getting into an accident, you know, like how that impacts families, et cetera, et cetera. So I definitely agree and understand. And I see a lot of organizations also focusing on safety and ensuring that they create the content for the user, the end user, the driver, you know, so that it's relatable to them, they understand it, and it's not like fancy words on a wall or whatever. So yeah, I really like that you brought that up. Just to wrap up, I think we're kind of coming to the end of our episode today. What do you think are some of the biggest threats with regards to fleet operations that no one ever pays attention to, or no one really pays attention to?
So going back, and I kind of went off on a tangent on the previous question,
No, it's okay.
but coming back to even that is the biggest threat, I think, for organizations is to understand that principle, what they're delivering could be something else, and neglecting the fundamentals of fleet management. In transport, sometimes we get so focused on rather delivering the consignment. The customer is happy, I've delivered.
Volume.
I'm making money. Yeah, and you forget the fleet management side of it. There's a gentleman, his name escapes me now. He stops a lot of trucks at different places, especially at Easter in December. He actually, at the Fleet Safety Awards, one of the awards is named after him. And the videos he posts of things he finds in trucks, it's like rust metal, tires that have wires showing. You're making money, yes, but you're going to lose much more than money. So I think it's that, understanding the science of it, but also having a seat at the table. And again, operators, but big commercial companies, this is where it normally sits. They need to understand that, yes, we're doing oil. Yes, we're delivering gas. We're delivering pallets. We're delivering sugar, whatever we're delivering. But we're doing a logistics thing. We're doing a fleet management thing. And the fundamentals are irrevocable. You have to maintain your vehicle. I think, and from an entrepreneurial perspective, we see a lot of people opening businesses and they're into SMEs. Just ethically do the right thing for yourself. I mean, a lot of very quality human beings, absolutely beautiful people. And there's a lot of other people who are not ethical in the running of fleets, undercutting their pricing to get the job. But it catches up with you. And you just have to be ethical. You have to do it right. From the entrepreneurial, from the commercial perspective, we have to make sure that person who's running the fleet has a seat at the table to influence certain things that must happen.
Okay. And what are some of the future trends that people should look out for or should think about or should upskill themselves on when it comes to fleet management?
I think the fleet management person ultimately becomes a leader as well. You know, there's an old saying that says, "He who leadeth and no one is followeth is merely taking a walk." and we have to make sure we create leaders in that space. And that's going to be a big trend, I think, that's will blindside a lot of people. When you're in operations, it's load the truck and deliver. It's fast-paced people. There's forklifts, there's dust, there's all types of things. You're trying to get the consignments out. But you also have to be a leader because those people that are in your care, Simon Sinek says you have to care for the people that are in your care. And so there's a leadership element, looking out for your leaders, for your people as well, and creating other leaders because we need more drivers in the sector. It's weird we have such unemployment, but we have a slowing down of rate of new drivers coming into the industry, which is a concern. We have to have fleet people on the ground. We have to have different structures on the ground. And I think you're going to see a trend where the technology becomes such a disruptor and it becomes also an enabler for all sizes of organizations. And those that adopt the technology and apply it right will survive and they will keep their customers happy. And I think the other thing is, just like with every industry, data science is going to be required. So a fleet manager that understands, IT people can come up with very nice language and say, we are going to do API integration. And we're from the University of Johannesburg. We've learned our English. Our English is wonderful. And you're like, what on earth, dude, are you talking about? I want this data to connect with this one, and it must speak to me. Like, tremendous. But you need to understand that. You need to understand that, and you need to give value to every facet of the business. So I think the trend is really going to be technology is going to really cause a lot of issues and disruption. You need to understand data science. You need to understand fundamentals of gleaning insights into the data that you have. And I think from there, if we do that, and again, the leader that is a fleet manager needs to speak to be comfortable talking to the CEO, be comfortable talking to the driver, be comfortable talking to anyone. And we think as a society, technology will take up so much, but we're losing the human touch. And if we balance that out, then we'll win. If we celebrate more technology instead of the human, we'll lose. But if we balance it out, then we'll definitely win.
Okay, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. It was a great conversation. I definitely learned a lot. I think our listeners will also learn a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.